Are you afraid to fail? Are you afraid to make mistakes during games? Does this fear hold you back and cause you to play scared during games? What I'm going to cover is what the fear of failure is and how it's formed, how the fear of failure holds you back as an athlete, and then what you can do as an athlete to manage your fear of failure. Fear of failure in sports is defined as the fear of making mistakes. There's this fear present that you don't want to make mistakes and you don't want to have negative outcomes happen. Now, I want you to think about the fear that you experience when you play. If you're experiencing this fear, if you find yourself scared during games, what is it that you are actually afraid of? Let's say that you are a baseball player. Are you afraid of striking out? Are you afraid of the act of swinging and missing or letting that ball go by and the umpire calls strike three? Is that what you're scared of? Or are you scared of what will happen if you strike out? This is known as being scared of the consequences of making mistakes or of having bad things happen to you during games. It's in the consequences that we truly find the cause or the driving force for fear of failure. So what could some of these consequences be if you find yourself afraid of striking out, let's say, if we're going to go off the baseball player example? Well, maybe you are afraid of your coach yelling at you if you strike out again. Maybe you are afraid of your stats dropping, right? Your batting average drops. That's a huge one that I see baseball players fear, and that's something that I admittedly feared when I was playing baseball, right? I was so worried about my stats dropping if I got out again. Or maybe you're worried that you're going to let your team down and you all won't win because you have runners on second and third. There are 2 outs. This is your opportunity, and you strike out. Or maybe you're just simply afraid of other people not thinking that you're that good. Now, these consequences can be transferred over to other sports, right? So let's imagine that you are a swimmer and you are afraid of failing or doing poorly in your next race. What are you actually afraid of there? Well, we could say that you are afraid of increasing your time, right? So you don't get a PB, you don't decrease your time. Maybe you are afraid of not placing very well within the meet. Maybe you are afraid of not making it to states or not making it to the next competition because you have to place, first, second, or third in order to do so. Maybe you are just simply worried about letting your parents down or other people not thinking that you are a fast swimmer anymore. A basketball player example would be that you are afraid of getting benched. You are afraid of letting your team down. You are afraid of embarrassing yourself. Maybe you're afraid of, losing your starting position. There are so many different consequences that you can experience as an athlete. But at the core of fear of failure will be this fear of the consequence. Because if we look at any sort of failing that you might be afraid of within sports, the act of failing itself is nothing to fear. It's what happens as a result of that failing. I want you to think about times when you perform the same actions that you do during games when you are afraid to fail, or even other games when you perform those actions and you don't experience as much fear. Why isn't the fear there during those times? Has anything changed in terms of the act that you are performing? Or are there just less consequences? A really great example of this is from a softball player that I've worked with who dealt with a lot of fear during team practices and games. Now, during team practices, she experienced a lot of fear because the coaches made them do push-ups and had some consequences for them if they made mistakes. And she also was afraid that her coach was going to get mad at her. Now, during games, if she had a bad at bat or made an error in the field, it was very likely that her coach was going to pull her the next inning, or maybe she wasn't going to be able to go out and play or start the next game. So she was afraid of these consequences. However, during times when she's practicing on her own or she's going to private lessons, and even during times when she's played games with different teams at camps, she hasn't experienced as much fear. The actions that she's doing are the same, but there's less fear. Why is there less fear? Because the consequences aren't the same. So that truly shows us that whenever you are experiencing fear, you want to look to the consequences of what you are afraid will happen if you fail. That starts to show us what's causing this fear of failure. Now, we want to also look at any past experiences that you've had as an athlete, because a lot of times when we are afraid of consequences, we are afraid of consequences because we have experienced those consequences before, right? So for this example, I actually want to give a personal example from something that I experienced when I was playing baseball growing up. So I can still very vividly remember a game my sophomore year in high school where I was playing a baseball game and I was moved over to shortstop. I was normally a shortstop when I played all my other, travel team games and everything, but on varsity, I was a second baseman because we had a senior playing shortstop that year. However, in this game, that senior had been put to pitcher. Our team honestly wasn't doing too well that game already. So he was put to pitcher. He doesn't normally pitch, or he didn't normally pitch. And I was moved over to shortstop. Now, I had already made one error that game at second base, so my confidence was pretty low. And then at shortstop, if I remember correctly, I think I made about 3 errors for the remainder of that game, and I definitely did not have a very good game at the plate. Long story short, our team ended up losing. After the game, now this is what really stands out to me in my mind. After the game, we were in the post-game huddle. We were on the first base side in the outfield. Our coach just laid into us. He just screamed and screamed and screamed at us. And I remember him, pointing his finger in my chest and just berating me for the game that I played, telling me that I belong down on the JV level, right? I shouldn't be playing in varsity. If I have another game like that, I'm going to be sent down to JV. Now, I don't blame him at all for getting mad at me. I played horribly, right? I played terribly that game. What sticks out to me, though, and what that generated was this fear because I did not handle his yelling very well, right? I was embarrassed, I was ashamed, and it led to me experiencing more fear because I didn't want to have that happen again. So because I didn't handle that correctly, I didn't process through the yelling, I experienced a lot of fear moving forward through that year, and I honestly experienced a lot of fear as I was getting older and I played in college. I experienced fear up to the point where I learned how to manage my fear and process through these negative emotions. But that right there shows us kind of this nice pairing between consequences that we think can happen and then negative past experiences that have happened, which combine to then create this fear of failure when you play. So we know that the fear of failure is when you are afraid of making mistakes, but it's not necessarily the mistake itself that you are afraid of. It is the consequence of the mistake. Will you get benched? Will you get yelled at? Will you feel embarrassed? Will you have those intense negative emotions? And a lot of times this will stem or be created by a negative past experience. Now, I want you to be careful here because your negative past experience doesn't have to be or seem incredibly intense to other people. It can be the simplest thing as being pulled from a game that plants that seed in your mind of, okay, I don't want to have this happen again, that can then lead you down that path of playing with fear and playing timidly. Now, that brings me to this next part, how fear of failure holds you back. When you are experiencing fear when you play, so when you play with this fear of the consequences and this fear of making mistakes, the reason that it's going to hold you back is because of the way it affects you physically, so the way that it affects your physical play, and then also the way that it affects your mindset. So let's start with how the fear of failure is going to hold you back physically. Now, there's a very common statement or phrase that I hear from athletes when I'm working with them in one-on-one coaching, which, by the way, if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one coaching, I've put a link to that in the description below. But it's this phrase that they tell me a lot when they are experiencing fear of failure. And it's, I feel like I'm playing with my foot on the brake, right? They are holding themselves back. And this stems from this idea of playing scared, playing timidly. So I want you to think about a situation in normal life, right? Normal day-to-day life, when you would be afraid of something. If you are afraid of something in real life and that fear is real, right? You really do need to be afraid of this thing. We could even go to an extreme example of you being in the wild and you being afraid of a predator, right? What would you do? Well, you would have 2 choices, right? You would go head-to-head with that predator, or you would try to avoid the predator. Now, what's probably gonna be the best option for you if it's an option in the first place? Avoiding, right? So you want to avoid, you want to hide, you want to play it safe. Now, in our minds, this fearful reaction, so thinking, I need to avoid this consequence that I don't want to have happen, it's going to be the same mental reaction as if you were in the wild, in real life, if you are really experiencing fear. Unfortunately, during a game, when you try to avoid and you're already out there on the field or on the court, you're just going to find yourself trying to hide when you play, and that's why you end up holding yourself back. You are playing with your foot on the brake because you're trying to avoid failing. You're trying to play safe. Now, playing it safe in the wild is what's going to keep you alive. Playing it safe during a game is what's going to cause you to leave the game feeling frustrated and disappointed in yourself. So a really great example of this, or a story that I want to share, comes from a soccer player that I've worked with. Now, this soccer player He was 14, I believe, when he and I began working together. And so I talked with his parents first. And his parents were telling me all about what he was going through and what he was experiencing. And they were telling me that it was almost as if he was hiding in the corner during the game. He was shying away from 1v1s. He was kind of avoiding calling for the ball. So he wasn't calling for the ball. He didn't want it passed to him. When he had open shots to take, he was passing off open shots. So all in all, he was hiding, right? He was holding himself back. But that was during games. Now, if we looked at practices, he was a completely different player. During practices, he was getting involved. He was going for these 1v1s. He was going for tackles because he played midfield, so he was going for tackles. He was taking shots on goal. He was scoring goals. He was getting assists when they did scrimmages during practice. So what changed, right? How could that player completely vanish when it came to games? Well, it was because of his fear, right? He was experiencing fear of failure, or the fear of the consequences of what would happen during games, because all of a sudden games were more important, right? Games were where a mistake mattered. It mattered if he made a mistake during games, and so he experienced a lot more of this fear, and this fear led him to hold himself back. So during games, he avoided, he passed the ball off, he just did not want to be involved, because while he might not have succeeded during the games, right? He wasn't playing his best during these games. He also wasn't playing terribly during these games. And that's this key thing that we need to look at when it comes to this fear. You might not be making a ton of mistakes right now because you're pretty successful at avoiding those mistakes, right? But if you're out there avoiding, if you're out there playing it safe, if you're playing timidly, yes, maybe you aren't making a ton of mistakes, but are you playing up to your potential? Are you being as effective as you've shown that you can be during practices? That's why this athlete's or this soccer player's parents reached out to me, not because he was making mistakes left and right, but because they were seeing one player perform super well during practice and individual training sessions, and they were seeing a completely different version of him out there during games, a version that was just hiding. Right? So for yourself, have you ever experienced these games where you've been just holding yourself back, you've been hiding? You may not be playing terribly, but you're also not being effective out there, and you leave that game knowing, I did not give it my all that game. If that's the case, then that's a good indicator that you're experiencing this fear, which drives this feeling of playing it safe, holding yourself back, playing timidly. So that's the main way this fear of failure will impact your physical game. It will cause you to hold yourself back and play timidly. Now, there's also a way that this fear of failure will affect your mindset, and that's more so from a loss of enjoyment. Now, I just started working with a player right now who is struggling with enjoying himself in his sport as much. And a lot of this has to do with fear. When you show up to the field or you show up to the court every single day with a lot of fear of what will happen, what will end up occurring is you start dreading practices. You start dreading games. Because when you do experience a lot of fear, unfortunately, you have a negative feeling before the game. And more often than not, you have a negative feeling after the game. Now, before the game, the negative feeling is this fear. Now, if you show up every single day to something and you experience intense feelings of fear, is that something you're going to want to do all the time? Is that something you're going to want to continue to do? Absolutely not, right? You feel fear, you're afraid. Why would you want to be afraid every single day? So that's where we're going to see this loss of joy happen before the games. Now, what about after games? Well, think about those games where you have played with a lot of fear. And right now, if you are playing with a lot of fear, think about your most recent game or practice. Are you leaving that game satisfied? Are you leaving that game feeling good about yourself and your performance? Or are you leaving that game feeling disappointed in yourself? Are you leaving that game feeling like, I know I could have done better today. I don't understand why I keep holding myself back. I don't understand why I keep just playing poorly and hiding out there. I just don't get it. So that's a negative emotion you have after games. So once again, we have this fear before games and disappointment and frustration after games. When both of those emotions happen over and over and over again, naturally you will lose joy. So this fear of failure, if it sticks around long enough, can quickly lead you to losing the enjoyment for your sport. Now, when you don't enjoy your sport as much, this is also where we'll see a lot of other mental game challenges form, and overall your performances will just drop even more. So when we know that the fear of failure will cause you to hold yourself back physically, and mentally it will take a toll on your mind to the point where you might not enjoy yourself as much anymore, then we understand that the fear of failure is a mental game challenge we need to give attention to and we need to start working on, which is why you need some strategies or some tools to help you manage this fear. As a mental performance coach, I look at mental game challenges like the fear of failure as something that we need to work through by developing positive mental skills. And so with the fear of failure, there are two main mental skills we want to focus on: confidence and altering your focus. So we're going to start with this confidence idea. Now, when you are experiencing a lot of fear, you are afraid of the consequences, right? Just like we discussed earlier. You're afraid of what's going to happen. You are afraid of the negative emotions you experience, all of that. Now, if you are fearful of what's going to happen, right? You're fearful of making these mistakes. Are you simultaneously confident that you're going to go out there and play well? No, right? That's a sign that you have very low confidence in yourself and your skills, which is 100% understandable, right? Because especially if you've experienced a negative past experience before or a negative past event, that's going to cause you to think, well, this negative thing's happen again, so I don't want to have this negative event happen again or this negative consequence. And so that takes a toll on your confidence. However, if we can build confidence in yourself, right? If we can regain that trust, if you can go back out there with this sense of knowing I can play well, number one, it's going to help you play with more aggressiveness. It's going to help you play with more effort. Now, when you give more aggressiveness and when you give more effort when you play, what ends up happening there is you don't hold yourself back as much. Now, when you're not holding yourself back as much, that's where you allow your talents to shine through, right? So we're going to see a difference in the way you play simply because you alter your confidence. But now also, going into games, you won't experience as much fear because you are having more trust in yourself and more confidence. So there are two ways that you want to start working on building this confidence for yourself. And, the first one has to do with the words that you're using, right? The way you're talking to yourself and the way that you're talking to other people. So right now, if you are experiencing this fear, think about all the different thoughts that you have going into a game, during a game, and after a game. If we categorize those thoughts, right? Would they fall under the category of confident thinking, or would they fall under the category of fearful thinking or scared thinking? If you're experiencing a lot of fear of failure, I'm going to guess that they fall under the category of fearful and scared thinking, because when you feel fearful, when you feel scared, you're going to be thinking scared. When you think scared thoughts, that's going to funnel back into more fearful feelings. And then when you play timidly, when you play scared, that's going to reinforce these negative thoughts, these fearful thoughts, which then once more reinforces these negative feelings, right? These feelings of, I don't know if I can play well. I hope I don't play poorly. We need to make sure that you start altering and changing those thoughts. Now, I will say this is one of the most difficult things that you can do as an athlete, because right now the fear is very real, and so it will be hard for you to change that thinking, which is why you want to make this more of an actionable process for you, right? So something that you can start doing is going through a simple exercise where you write down your scared thoughts when you notice you have them. This is something that I just had an athlete begin doing yesterday, where, you list out, these are the thoughts that I'm scared of. I'm scared of making a mistake, or I'm thinking to myself, I hope I don't embarrass myself in tomorrow's game. And then underneath it, you just rewrite that, right? Write down a statement that says, I trust in myself for tomorrow's game, or I believe in myself. You just want to begin going through this process where you reframe these scared thoughts into more confident and calming thoughts. Now, do you think that if you're afraid right now and you're feeling a lot of fear, you're feeling a lot of feelings of being scared about your performance, do you need to tell yourself, I am the best player, I'm the greatest? Yes, if that helps. No, if you don't believe it. So what I mean by that is I have a lot of athletes who I work with, and when we're working on self-talk, which is what I'm discussing right here, they tell me that they don't want to lie to themselves, and they tell me that it doesn't work if they're trying to convince themselves of something they do not currently believe. And I 100% agree with that, because personally, if I'm trying to tell myself something super positive, but I don't feel that way, it's not going to be effective. And what we're after right now is using your thinking and changing your thinking to be effective at helping to reduce this fear of failure. So you want to make sure that what you begin telling yourself and the thoughts you begin having are thoughts that you'll actually have in the moment and thoughts you'll actually believe. So an example is if you're trying to tell yourself, I am the greatest. If that helps you feel confident and aggressive, do it, right? Tell yourself that. If it doesn't, if you start thinking, well, no, I'm not, I've been playing poorly recently, then you would want to say something to yourself like, I've been training really hard, I believe in myself, I'm just going to go out here and play my hardest, I trust that I can have a good game. You don't have to say I'm the greatest player in the world, but you do want to talk to yourself in a more comforting and confident way. Because we know hands down that speaking to yourself in a fearful way is not helping you perform well. It is creating timid play. So you have to work on altering that thinking, but don't feel like you have to jump to the other end of the spectrum where you're saying extreme things like, I'm the greatest, I'm the best. Once again, if that helps you, great. If not, say something a little bit more calming and realistic like, I trust in my training. I'm going to go out here. I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to play my hardest today, and I'm going to see what happens. I'm not going to worry about the outcome. Just something that will help build confidence in your skills and reduce this fear. The next idea when it comes to building confidence is we need to think about the images that are in your mind when you are playing with fear. When you're going into a game right now and you are experiencing fear and you are scared of making mistakes, are you thinking about times where you've made mistakes in the past, especially if you've experienced that past bad experience or that past bad game like we talked about earlier? I can remember back when I was playing, when I experienced a lot of fear, everything that filled my mind were thoughts of me failing in that game and thoughts of me failing before. Now, I don't know what sport you play, but if you play a sport that watches film, I want you to think about how crazy you would think your coach was if days leading up to the game and on game day, your coach made you all watch film of you playing poorly. That's all you watched. You just watched film of you missing baskets, getting scored on, throwing interceptions, missing blocks, missing tackles, striking out left and right. Would you think, okay, coach has gone a little off his rocker. Why are we just watching video of us playing poorly? And it's not in a way of even learning. It's just, this is a mistake, this is a mistake, this is a mistake, this is a mistake. And you're never learning from him. You're just beating yourselves up over those mistakes. That's what's happening when you are experiencing so much fear of failure going into a game and during a game if you don't try to alter this thinking. Because if you don't try to alter the thinking, the thoughts that will be in your mind are thoughts of you failing, whether they are failures you've had in the past or whether they are failures that you might have in the future during that game. You're having negative visualization where you are visualizing mistakes. Now, if all you're thinking of and all you're seeing in your mind is you making mistakes, just like if all you were watching days leading up to the game was film of you performing poorly, where would your confidence be? Would it be up here? Or would it be down here? Your confidence is not going to be very high if you're seeing yourself making mistakes. It's going to be pretty low, especially if you're thinking that going into the game. So if you want to build more confidence in yourself, you have to make sure that the thoughts, like we said a second ago, are positive, but you also have to make sure that the scenes you are creating in your mind are of you succeeding. And so this is where visualization becomes very, very important and helpful. Days leading into games, you want to visualize yourself performing well because you know that you need to be creating scenes in your mind of you succeeding, because a lot of the scenes in your mind right now when you're experiencing fear are of you failing. So that's what you want to do to help with your confidence. Start paying attention to your thoughts. You have to change your thoughts if you want to change your feelings when it comes to playing. And when you start changing those thoughts, that will start to affect the way you play physically, which we're going to talk more about here in a second with the focus. But make sure you start changing your thoughts. And then number 2, use some visualization, because the scenes that you create in your mind, what you're picturing about yourself with your game, is crucial to your confidence. And if you're seeing yourself perform poorly, your confidence is going to drop. If you're seeing yourself perform well, your confidence is going to go up. Now, the second part to managing this fear of failure is altering your focus. So if you think all the way back to earlier when I was talking about what causes this fear of failure in the first place, I said there are 2 main drivers of this fear of failure: worrying about consequences and negative past experiences. The reason that the negative past experience will affect the fear of failure is because it's left an imprint on your subconscious. What we have to do is recognize that going into the game, you're going to be remembering the time you failed, the time you've made mistakes, and so that's going to drive this fear. When it comes to the consequences, that sometimes is more of a conscious thought or focus you're having during the game or before the game, where you think about all these different negative things that could happen. Both of those have to do with your focus, right? If you focus on past experiences going into games, whether it's conscious or you're doing this subconsciously, you're thinking about those games and you're focusing on them. And then when you focus on the negative outcome that you don't want to have happen. Number one, we recognize that your focus is everywhere but the present moment, and your focus is also on things that drive fear. So what you want to do is you want to work on focusing on what's going to be effective for you and also what's controllable for you in the moment. Something that's incredibly simple here, right? Super, super simple is focusing on giving full effort if that's something that is actually necessary for your sport or will be effective for your sport. So earlier I gave the example or the story of the young soccer player who was experiencing a lot of fear during his game. And the simplest change that he and I made was changing what he focused on going into games. Or in other words, changing what was important for him going into games. Because during these games when he experienced a lot of fear, what was important to him was not making mistakes, right? That's what would help him avoid these consequences. We worked on shifting that focus to be what's important is succeeding. And then he thought, how do I succeed? And he succeeds by playing well, obviously, but then what was controllable about him playing well was giving full effort, especially since we knew that when he was playing timidly and scared, he was not giving full effort. So what I had him do was going into games, focus purely on giving full effort. That became his new benchmark for success. Was he focusing on giving full effort? Yes. Great. It was a great game. No. Okay. Why not? Let's try to give more effort next game. So if you play a sport like basketball, football, soccer, this can even work with swimming. It can work with baseball at times and softball at times. It can work sometimes with tennis. If you play a sport where giving full effort will help you be more in the moment and it will actually be effective, I would suggest that being what you focus on going into games. And the reason that giving full effort helps so much with the fear of failure is because, like I said earlier, the fear of failure causes you to play timidly and play with your foot on the brake. So one of the things we're going to see right away is when you do experience this fear of failure, you won't give full effort because you cannot be giving full effort if you're trying to play it safe, and you can't play it safe if you're also trying to give full effort, right? So we see this change your actual physical play and start to counteract the physical effect of the fear of failure. But what also happens is when you do give full effort, most of the time that will lead to more success for you. When you start to feel more successful and you find yourself playing better during games, this creates some wonderful momentum where you start to build your confidence because now you're seeing yourself play well instead of seeing yourself play poorly. So that's one thing you can do with this focus is just work on focusing on giving full effort if that's going to be effective for you. Now, the other part of this is you want to focus on something very simple in the moment that's controllable. And this will be effort if effort's something that will be effective for you, like I said. But, let's say that you are a hitter in baseball or softball. Giving full effort might not necessarily be helpful, especially if you find yourself swinging too big, right? So you're trying to force a hit right now because you're not hitting very well, or you are afraid of striking out. So at that point, giving full effort might be counterproductive. So instead for you still want to simplify though, right? You still want to focus on something controllable and you still want to focus on something in the moment. So this is where you set what's known as a performance objective. And so you think to yourself, what do I need to do? And what can I control about not making mistakes? So in other words, what can you control about playing well? Once you identify something very simple that you can control about playing well, you want to focus on that going into the game. So an example for a baseball or softball hitter would be, what can I control? Being aggressive at early strikes. All right, that's what I want to control and that's what I want to focus on. Or maybe I just focus on picking the ball up early out of the pitcher's hand. Anything that you can make sure you do every single time that brings your attention back into the present moment is going to be effective with helping with this fear of failure. Because overall, as an athlete, if you've been putting in the work in, if you've been training, you have the skills you need to succeed, right? You're talented enough, especially if you find yourself playing well in practices but not playing well in games. So we cannot start stressing about mechanics. If you're playing scared, if you're playing timidly, if you're holding yourself back, most of the time, mechanics will not be the problem. Of course, you can always improve mechanics, right? There's always something that you can work on mechanically to fine-tune and adjust your physical skills. But when it comes to playing timidly, holding yourself back, the fear of failure is the cause. And so all that we're trying to do with managing the fear of failure is getting you to the point where you can play freely again. Getting you to the point where you can allow your skills to take over. And when you do, you will find yourself playing better during these games. And then, like I said, that creates wonderful momentum where success during games generates more confidence, which continues to manage your fear. So right now, if you are struggling with the fear of failure, I highly encourage you to think through, what am I focused on going into games? Am I focused too much on these consequences? And are these consequences causing me to play timidly and hold myself back? And if so, you need to make sure you work on changing your thinking and using visualization to build your confidence. And then change your focus going into these games. If you can, just focus on giving full effort. If not, choose one simple and controllable objective for you to focus on to bring yourself and bring your attention into the present moment and just allow yourself to play freely, absent of fear. If you have any questions about this video, please let me know in the comments below. And if there's any other sports psychology topic you would like me to cover, please let me know that as well. Thank you for watching, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.